Today's topic is how to modify the collar of porcelain fused to metal so that porcelain can be applied to the edge, to the actual margin. Now here we have a diagram of a generic tooth and a routine preparation. We're assuming, of course, this is an anterior. Here is our lingual wall, lingual fossa, proportional reduction with a shoulder, and reduction in the incisal third that approximates the shape of the tooth so that we have the potential for uniformity of thickness of the metal substructure and the overlying porcelain. And we'll notice that we have a shoulder prepared approximately at the level of the gingiva with a bevel that goes subgingivally. Now, were we to restore this, the shape of the metal would look something like this. The gingival third is in metal on the lingual surface. The metal comes down like so, and then it comes out here. This is metal. This is metal. There's metal on the shoulder, and there's a metal collar. Then when we apply the porcelain, it just replaces everything that is missing. So the porcelain goes there. But, and if this metal lines up with the gingiva, or is slightly below it, then what we see as we're looking at this is porcelain with a subgingivally hidden collar. But let's make this a little more clear. Here's the same thing with a larger diagram. This is our metal as it comes down, comes over here, ends on this one, slightly subgingival, and here's our metal collar. Curiously, however, this is not the design that we ever get back from dental students. Instead, they give us a configuration of a metal collar that looks something like this. Now, if we're lucky, we may have the gingiva up here, so that as we look, this metal collar is hidden from view. However, there has been an addition of metal into the sulcular space that never existed on the original anatomy of the tooth. So the very first thing that has to be done to correct this so that it comes back to this is to correct the emergence profile. And so to do that, we will take the appropriate stone and we will cut off this unusual extension into the sulcular space. All of this is eliminated. It's gone. But now our metal is here. And if we look at this, we can see metal between here and here. We can see this much metal. Just because of the bulk at this angle, when we then thin this, that's the amount of metal that we see. Just to draw it one more time to make it very, very clear. This is what you give us. Straightening the emergence profile then exposes this much metal. And it's now visible in this zone. Okay, so this is the first step. Now, let's say that our gingival margin is actually down here. We can see all of this. And if we don't want to see that, we have to remove this collar all the way down to the margin. If we were to try to just come straight down here and then cut over, we'd have no metal left. We could break the collar right off. So what we have to do is to create a chamfered finish and remove this metal on a curve, preserving bulk here, but bringing it right down to the very margin. So it's a two-step procedure. The first thing we do is eliminate the overhang, the bulge out into the sulcular epithelium. Frankly, what we're doing here is just bringing the crown contour into line for even a gold crown. Even a gold crown should not have this thing sticking into the sulcus. Once this is straight, back to the original anatomy of the tooth, we then hollow out the extra bulk on a curve right down to the margin, as drawn here. Okay, now we happen to have an anterior bridge where we know that every one of the collars on the abutment needs to have this procedure done. We need to first straighten the emergence profile and then create this curved hollow grind cut to the margin to provide room for porcelain. To do this, we will be using nail abrasives. They're called brownstones, even though they are tan in color. This is one. This is not a greenstone. This is a greenstone. I know you're going to expect me to say that the difference between the brownstone, which is tan, and the greenstone is the color. That's true, but there's more to it. But we can complicate it and give you these, which is sort of a reddy purple stone, otherwise known as a pink stone or called an aluminum oxide stone. So you have in your kit these three stones, various shapes, and I'm not here to discuss shapes, just color and what the color signifies. Each one of these stones is specific for a different type of metal. They have all been engineered to work with a unique form of metal. This one, the aluminum oxide stone, is for trimming chromium cobalt, nickel cobalt, otherwise known as RPD framework material. It is not appropriate for PFM metal. The green stone, which works beautifully for type 3 gold, would also work well with this metal. However, it contains carbon, and carbon becomes impregnated in the metal surface and then comes through into the porcelain as a discoloration. So we do not use the greenstone. This nail-abrasive brown, i.e. tan, stone is designed specifically for this metal, and so therefore that's what I'll be using. Now, I don't know how close up we can get with the camera, but I'm going to try to hold this at such an angle that you can see the profile of these extended margins, particularly on this tooth. Can you see it, camera? The camera's not so sure. So, we'll come up at a slightly different angle. Is this any better? Camera's now happier. Excellent. All righty. Now what I'm about to do will be difficult for you to see as I'm doing it, but I will then hold this up again for view when I'm finished. In the meantime, if the camera would be so kind as to follow me. All right. So, to begin, I'm using a thumb grasp on the straight nose cone, slow speed, with the gneiss stone in place, and I'm going to hold it along the long axis, and the shape of the burr and the position of the burr relative to the unit will, as I work across here, take this fat emergence profile and flatten it. Step one. Now, if you took a good look at the picture, you will have noted that the collar had a certain height to it. Height meaning its dimension from the actual margin running upwards in a coronal or occlusal direction. If you remember from the diagram, this process takes a cut into a meatier section of metal and actually raises the interface of the collar occlusally so that if we were not to hollow this out, we'd actually see more metal than we did a moment ago. The emergence profile has now been flattened, and we'll take the time to take another still picture to show you. As you saw from the photograph, there's a clear distinction now in the emergence profile between the tooth that has just been modified and its neighbor that has not yet been touched. And you may have also noticed that the height of the collar is less on the uncut tooth than it is on the modified one. Okay, but we also know that we want our porcelain not to end here, but to end here. So what I'm going to do now with this stone is hollow out this collar so that there's room for porcelain right to the margin. To do this, I will begin cutting right here, but as I get closer and closer to the margin, I'm lifting the burr away. And I'll just trying various positions to show you. I'll be lifting it up so that I don't cut into the inside of the crown. Now, if we look at the inside of the crown, you can see the original shoulder that was placed in the preparation, and then the bevel beyond it. I'm not at all concerned about preserving the shape of a shoulder and bevel on the outside of the metal. If when I carve this up, I eliminate any line here that distinguished the original collar from the facial metal, so be it. If I leave a little line, that's okay too. It will just fill with the opaque. Okay, here we go. Cutting into the metal and lifting, lifting, lifting. Now, at this point in time, March 10th, 2008, there are two doctors who are authorized to approve porcelain to the edge. Those two doctors are Dr. Appleby, that would be me, and Dr. Tarnoff, who is Mr. Cameraman. Dr. Cameraman. Why is it limited to us? Because both of us are willing to sit down with you and show you how to do this. And we know precisely where it should be done, how it should be done. However, everyone else on the staff is well versed at this technique, and you are certainly welcome to bring it to them, do it with them, and when it's finished, bring it to us just to get the signatures. As I've said all along, I'm running it, then lift, 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 up, 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 so that when I get to the very edge, I still have a margin. And now I look down on it, and you can see, perhaps, that it's knife edge, but a photograph is now in order. Okay, after preparing the margin for porcelain to the edge, the final thing we must do is prepare the entire porcelain bearing surface with the Ney head braces. And to do that, we eliminate all of the scratches in the facial surface and the incisal edge that have left over from being worked on with metal, or left over just from perhaps a little bit less than smooth wax up. And the reason why we're doing this is to ensure that on the microscopic level, EM level in fact, that all the metal elements are lined up parallel to each other. If you want to imagine this as a pile of logs all neatly stacked, or the rows that you would find on a pair of corduroy pants. If you get all of the metal elements lined up together, then there's no airspace between them. And if there's no airspace, you have more metal surface area for a stronger bond with the opaque porcelain. If, on the other hand, all of these scratches are made randomly, then the metal is piled on top of each other in a random fashion, and between the metal elements are air pockets, and the air doesn't bond to the opaque. So it's absolutely essential that everything be running in a parallel direction for the sake of maximizing and strengthening the bond of the porcelain. Now, all in the same direction. Certainly, that could all be in an up and down direction or a diagonal direction. But by convention, we want all of it to be done horizontally at 90 degrees to the long axis of the tooth. And that's to help the laboratory technicians, because when they hold this with a pair of hemostats and apply the opaque is runny. And if the grooves went up and down, it would cause the opaque to run up and down very quickly. By placing the lines of metal horizontally, that helps to prevent the downward flow of the opaque and just makes life easier. Alrighty, well, now what's necessary, of course, on this is to finish the margins on this one, and this one, and this one, and that's what will be done. Here we are in the master cast. Well, while this is not quite as good as having the patient with us, it certainly shows the effect. Here's the tooth that has been prepared for porcelain to the edge, and its neighbor has not. And when we go subgingivally, and the wax here represents the gingival margin, we can see that we still see a hint of the collar on this one and absolutely none on its neighbor. Finally, for those of you who are hoping to see the metal ready for the application of porcelain, here it is. Once again, it's on the master cast. The metal margins have been prepared to receive porcelain to the edge. In profile, the pontics have been brought back so that they're in the same contour as the abutments, so that the porcelain will be uniform from tooth to tooth to tooth. The incisal height is appropriate for the application of porcelain, and it is mounted on the articulator. So there we are. The master cast having fulfilled its function of providing a cast that allows us to have the porcelain applied.